The longest snake alive today is the reticulated python, a creature that can stretch over 20 feet long and squeeze the life out of animals much larger than itself. It lives in the rainforests and wooded areas of Southeast Asia. It kills not with venom, but with crushing force, wrapping its coils tighter with every exhale its prey takes. But even that giant is dwarfed by more ancient monsters. In 2023, scientists described a new extinct species called Vasuki indicus, a snake so massive it could have reached 50 feet long, rivaling the girth of a car. It lived in India over 47 million years ago, slithering through the jungle like a prehistoric nightmare. And snakes like these weren't rare freaks of nature. They were part of a whole evolutionary gauntlet our ancestors had to survive through. For millions of years, early mammals, primates, and hominins shared their world with giant constrictors, venomous vipers, and other camouflaged predators lurking in the trees, grass, and water. These creatures were ready to ambush at any moment, so our ancestors had to be ready to fight or flee. The fear of snakes isn't just superstition or bad luck. It's something deeper, something hardwired. In this video, we'll explore how snakes shaped human evolution, not just physically, but psychologically and culturally, why we're programmed to be fearful of them from birth, and why they appear in myths, dreams, and symbols around the world. After you hear what the science says, you'll understand how our two lineages have been in a true evolutionary arms race for millions of years. From deep within our brains to the stories we tell, the serpent's influence runs rampant. We may have left the jungle, but the snake never left us. Fear is more than just an emotion. It is a critical feature of survival. At the center of the fear response is the amygdala, an almond-shaped cluster deep in the brain of vertebrates like mammals, birds, and some reptiles. It acts like an alarm system. When a potential threat is spotted, sensory information rushes through the thalamus to the amygdala, which rapidly assesses the danger and can trigger the well-known fight or flight response within milliseconds. This activates other brain regions like the hypothalamus and autonomic nervous system, increasing heart rate, sharpening focus, and preparing the body to either flee or defend itself. What's remarkable is how the visual cortex has evolved to detect certain shapes and patterns associated with threats, like the sinuous curve of a snake. From an evolutionary standpoint, this is incredibly advantageous. It kept our ancestors alive. Organisms that react quickly to danger are more likely to survive and pass on their genes. Over time, this led to the development of instinctive fear responses to common, life-threatening hazards in our ancestral environments, like heights, spiders, or other dangerous humans. Fear helps us avoid unnecessary risk, stay alert to potential threats, and learn from dangerous experiences. In social species like humans, these responses can even be passed culturally, like how children learn to fear what their caregivers fear. It's a fast, deeply wired system designed not to make us comfortable, but to make us cautious, vigilant, and alive. Of all the frightening stimuli in the natural world, the fear of snakes, in particular, seems to be especially salient in humans. The psychological literature shows this explicitly. It starts from a very young age as well, presumably before such a fear can be formally taught and learned. Studies looking at infants, some as young as 8 months, show that images of snakes capture their attention more rapidly than images of frogs, and significantly more rapidly than images of flowers. Another experiment testing the reaction time of 4-year-olds came to a similar finding. They were asked to spot the one snake picture within a matrix of 8 other photos consisting of flowers, all of which were in black and white. The catch is that in some of the displays, the snake was in a coiled, striking position, while in others, the snake was at rest. They found that the children detected the snakes in a striking position faster than those at rest. This persists through adulthood, as the same experiment was conducted on adults and came to the same conclusion. Early posterior negativity, or EPN, is a brain signal seen in EEG scans that reflects early, automatic attention to emotionally important or biologically relevant images. EPN studies have shown that areas of the brain dealing with vision, like the occipital lobe, are more active when perceiving snakes than other reptiles, spiders, or slugs. Experiments from the 1990s proved that physiological responses to snakes arise before people are even consciously aware that they are looking at a snake. It was in the early 2000s when much of this research was accumulating and pointing to the same conclusion. Humans are born to fear snakes. And in 2006, anthropologist Lynn Isbell published a monumental paper on the subject, looking to explain it from an evolutionary perspective. Now known as the snake detection hypothesis, Isbell expressed in detail the selective pressures that snakes have had on the human lineage, dating back to the earliest primates. But Isbell's theory went even further, suggesting that snakes didn't just scare us, they may have helped shape who we are and the way we see the world. And hey, by the way, if you find human evolution and stuff like this interesting, check out my free newsletter in the description. When you subscribe to the Point 2 newsletter, you'll get a free archaeology cheat sheet with terms and phrases in the world of archaeology that you should know. But for a proper baseline understanding of archaeology, go to the link for my free ebook Archaeology 101 in the description. Now back to the video. Where does our story as humans really begin? Technically, we could go all the way back to the origin of life on Earth more than 3 billion years ago. But most anthropologists agree that human-like traits really started with the emergence of the first primates. The earliest primates are believed to have emerged around 55 to 66 million years ago, during the Paleocene and early Eocene epochs, shortly after the mass extinction that wiped out the dinosaurs. These early primates were small, tree-dwelling mammals, most likely nocturnal, who thrived in the dense, humid forests of what are now North America, Europe, Asia, and Africa. Fossil evidence of early primate-like creatures, such as Purgatorius, has been found in what is now Montana, and dated to just a few 100,000 years after the extinction event, making it one of the earliest known members of the primate lineage. Purgatorius and other early primates like Plesiadapiforms were arboreal species. They were adapted to life in the trees. Unlike many other mammals of their time, they had grasping hands and feet, nails instead of claws, and forward-facing eyes, which provided overlapping fields of vision for better depth perception, an adaptation crucial for navigating complex forest canopies. These traits helped distinguish them from other mammals and laid the groundwork for the primate order as we know it. Their enhanced visual systems, particularly the expansion of brain regions dedicated to vision, suggest that sight became increasingly important in their daily survival, perhaps more so than smell, which remained dominant in other mammal groups. As we will see, this trend continues throughout our evolutionary history. Before the snake detection hypothesis was ever proposed, scientists had already been wrestling with big questions about why primates developed these unique traits. One popular theory was the arboreal hypothesis, which suggests that our ancestors evolved sharp vision and grasping hands to navigate the complex three-dimensional world of trees. Another is the visual predation hypothesis, which argues that primates developed forward-facing eyes and fine motor skills to stealthily hunt insects in dense foliage. A more recent idea, the angiosperm coevolution hypothesis, points to the rise of flowering plants and the fruit they produced, arguing that primates became visually attuned to colors and shapes to identify ripe fruit and nectar. With regard to these hypotheses, Lynn Isbell has this to say. Although they disagree on the targeted object, all hypotheses propose that reaching and grasping were involved in the evolution of orbital convergence in primates, and all attempt to explain the entire suite of primate characteristics as a unitary phenomenon. However, this traditional view that the suite of primate characteristics evolved together is now being reconsidered. Investigations into the early primates and rodents suggest that reaching and grasping evolved first, followed by orbital convergence, meaning forward-facing eyes, and visually guided reaching and grasping. These are two more uniquely primate characteristics. As an alternative, Isbell and others developed this snake detection hypothesis. Snakes were likely the first serious predators of early mammals. Over millions of years, they drove the evolution of vigilance and fear responses in the mammalian brain, especially in areas that deal with sight and detecting threats. In primates, those brain regions grew even more, becoming more deeply connected to vision. There's also a pattern. The longer primates lived alongside snakes, especially venomous snakes, the more advanced their vision tends to be. Old world monkeys, apes, and humans, who've coexisted with venomous snakes the longest, have the sharpest vision, full color perception, and show more consistent fear of snakes. In contrast, Malagasy primates who evolved without venomous snakes have poorer visual acuity and don't often react fearfully to snakes at all. New World monkeys fall somewhere in between, with mixed visual abilities and a more complex evolutionary history, initially evolving in Africa with venomous snakes, but then migrating to South America, where such threats reappeared millions of years later. This exposure timeline helps explain why primate vision varies so much across species. Additionally, primates have a less developed sense of smell compared to most other mammals. Evolutionarily, it appears that we traded scent for these increased visual abilities. Some neural pathways, like the coniocellular and parvocellular systems, are believed to help with spotting threats quickly and recognizing objects in detail, giving primates a huge survival advantage. Seeing a snake before it struck could mean the difference between life and death. More recent studies have found support for many of these ideas. One published in 2013 identified specific neurons in macaque brains that respond faster to snake stimuli than to other monkeys or geometric shapes. Importantly, these macaques had no prior experience with snakes at all. A more recent study published in 2021 found that old world primates, which have a longer coevolutionary history with venomous snakes, have evolved an increased resistance to their toxins. The toxins in questions are neurotoxins found in cobra venom. They target the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors in muscles, blocking nerve cells and causing paralysis. Afro-Asian primates adapted to this by making it harder for the neurotoxins to bind, granting a degree of resistance to the paralyzing effects of the venom. This resistance likely evolved through frequent antagonistic interactions with venomous snakes like cobras. In short, the need to spot snakes early and often may have helped push primates toward better eyesight, bigger brains with different neuronal traits, and more developed physiological adaptations like toxin resistance. But what about humans specifically? Given the geographic overlap between snakes and early humans, we can infer that they encountered one another as did and do other primates. But just encountering one another is not sufficient to trigger evolutionary change. Humans certainly carried over many of the adaptations just discussed from their earlier primate ancestors. But did the arms race continue? Did snakes threaten the survival of early humans? We can't really look at the fossil record for this because snakes digest their prey whole, unlike other predators that will devour flesh but leave the bone for us to discover. However, we can look at modern examples from places where snakes are prevalent or where people live traditional lifeways that are more similar to those of ancient hunter-gatherers. Globally, it is estimated that there are about 5.5 million snake bites, 1.8 million cases of snakebite envenoming, and 94,000 deaths due to snake bites annually. These cases disproportionately affect certain areas of the world more than others. People living in rural areas predictably tend to have a higher chance of getting bit than those living in urban settings. In Mozambique, for example, researchers found that nearly 70,000 people are bit by snakes annually. 1 in 8 of those results in death. The Aita people of the Philippines have historically lived hunter-gatherer lifestyles, and they share their land with the mighty reticulated python. The ethnographic documentation of these people has been reviewed to assess the effects of snakes on their population. In summary, it's been reported that pythons have attacked 25.9% of men, but interestingly, only 1.6% of women. 15% of the Aita people interviewed in these documents reported knowing at least one person who has been killed by a python. These attacks generally occurred while walking through dense forests for hunting and gathering activities aligned with the traditional human niche. The authors of this study said, "Observations summarized here show that the Aita hunter-gatherers had dangerous ecological relationships with giant serpents. Biomedical research into the indigenous Warani of the Ecuadorian rainforest has reported that 45% of the 600-person population has experienced at least one snake bite, and at least 95% of males. Again, the researchers note how many of these traits occur while male hunters are quietly stalking game with their eyes fixed upon the canopy. Among the Warani, snake bites account for 4% of deaths. So while we seldom excavate a snake-bitten femur or point to an ancient bite mark in the fossil record, the patterns are clear. Throughout human prehistory, snakes posed a very real and deadly threat. For millions of years, they coexisted with our ancestors, not as passive background noise, but as active, stealthy predators that shaped the way we move, perceive, and even think. From the grasping hands of Purgatorius to the neurotoxin resistance in Old World monkeys, the evolutionary fingerprints of this arms race are still visible in our biology today. In a world without guns or even spears, seeing a snake before it struck meant survival. But what happens when a threat is so deeply ingrained in our evolutionary past that it begins to live in our minds, even after it's no longer present in many of our modern lives? In many parts of the world today, most people will never be bitten by a snake, and yet the fear remains. Humans, uniquely among primates, have transformed their fears into stories. Across continents and cultures, snakes have slithered their way into our myths, religions, and folklore, not just as literal predators, but as symbols of wisdom, chaos, transformation, and evil. In the next section, we'll explore how snakes made the leap from evolutionary threat to cultural icon. Over the past century or so, we've made a lot of progress in our understanding of genetics and biological evolution. That said, there is far more that we still don't know. For example, we are just now realizing the role of epigenetics. It's the idea that behaviors and environmental factors can change the way genes work without altering the DNA sequence itself, changes that can sometimes be passed down to future generations. Moreover, intergenerational trauma, or the passing down of the psychological and emotional effects of trauma from one generation to the next, seems to be a very real thing, even if the descendants didn't directly experience the original trauma themselves. Through mechanisms like these, as well as many other processes we have yet to discover, it is not unreasonable to suggest that the cultural symbols of snakes and serpents are the product of repeated snake predation over the course of human evolution. These myths and stories likely weren't conscious decisions on our part. They're prime examples of how the universally important features of our deep history manifest themselves in our modern lives in mysterious and complicated ways. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, the snake emerges as a central symbol of temptation, deception, and the origin of human sin. In the book of Genesis, the serpent appears in the Garden of Eden, seducing Eve into eating the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge. This act of disobedience results in the expulsion of Adam and Eve from paradise and introduces the concept of original sin into the human condition. The snake, though not explicitly identified as Satan in the original text, came to be associated with the devil in later interpretations. Its role in this myth is that of a cunning manipulator, using charm and deceit to subvert divine command. This framing of the snake has deeply influenced Western cultural and religious thought, cementing it as a symbol of evil, moral weakness, and the fragility of human will in the face of temptation. It's something to be aware and cautious of. The Ouroboros, an ancient symbol depicting a snake or dragon devouring its own tail, represents the cyclical nature of existence, eternity, rebirth, and the unity of all things. Its origins trace back to ancient Egypt, where it appeared in funerary texts as a metaphor for the eternal cycle of life and death. The Greeks later adopted and expanded upon this idea, incorporating the Ouroboros into alchemical and philosophical traditions. In this form, the snake becomes a paradoxical figure. It consumes itself to sustain itself, embodying the idea that endings are also beginnings. It symbolizes not just destruction, but transformation, the continuous loop of renewal that governs the cosmos and consciousness alike. Unlike the Snake of Eden, the Ouroboros is not moralized. It is neutral, ancient, and cosmic, simply reflecting the rhythms of the natural world and the enduring mystery of existence. In Hindu and Buddhist traditions, Nagas are serpent-like beings imbued with spiritual power and complex symbolism. Often depicted as cobras or half-human, half-snake figures, Nagas are associated with water, fertility, and the underworld. In Hindu mythology, they dwell in subterranean realms and guard treasure, while in Buddhism, they are considered protectors of sacred teachings and powerful natural forces. A well-known legend recounts how the Naga king, Mukalinda, shielded the meditating Buddha from a storm by coiling around him and spreading his hood like an umbrella. This act positions the Naga not as a malevolent threat, but as a spiritual ally, capable of great compassion and strength. However, Nagas can also be vengeful and dangerous when disrespected, embodying the duality of nature, nurturing and destruction. In ancient Mesoamerican cultures, particularly among the Olmec, Maya, and Aztec civilizations, the snake reached divine status, like in the form of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god of the Aztec. Quetzalcoatl was a complex deity associated with wind, wisdom, fertility, creation, and the morning star, or Venus. As both celestial and terrestrial, the feathered serpent represented the union of opposites, earthly power and divine intelligence. For the Aztecs, Quetzalcoatl was not only a cultural hero who taught agriculture and the arts, but also played a role in the myth of human origin, retrieving bones from the underworld to create humankind. His serpentine form emphasized fluidity, transformation, and movement across realms, while his feathers symbolized transcendence and the heavens. Unlike the villainous snake of Eden, Quetzalcoatl was a revered figure, whose return was prophesized, a bringer of civilization and harmony rather than chaos. His enduring presence in Mesoamerican iconography underscores his sacred power. The modern medical symbol featuring a snake coiled around a staff, known as the rod of Asclepius, traces back to ancient Greek mythology. This symbolism possibly emerged from the snake's ability to shed its skin, a powerful metaphor for healing and regeneration. However, it might also reflect an ancient understanding, conscious or not, that the same things we fear are the things we must investigate to solve the very problems they pose. Venoms, after all, are among the deadliest substances in nature, yet they're also used to develop life-saving antivenoms. Similarly, the idea of introducing a small amount of a pathogen to build immunity underpins vaccines. The snake, in this sense, becomes a symbol of controlled danger, a creature that can kill but also cure. Its dual nature mirrors the role of the healer, who must understand both harm and healing. The fact that a venomous creature came to represent the medical profession may not be accidental. It hints at a deep-rooted recognition that the path to wellness sometimes runs through calculated risk. Dragons can be seen as mythological abstractions of snakes or serpents, magnified into grander, more terrifying forms that demand to be conquered. They seem to represent a symbolic synthesis of the snake. They slither, they're often venomous or fire-breathing, and they usually guard something precious, a hoard, a princess, or sacred knowledge. But they're enormous and exaggerated, raising the stakes of the encounter and turning the act of killing a snake into a full-fledged hero's trial. In this way, dragons can be seen as psychological or cultural stand-ins for our ancestral fear of snakes. Slaying a dragon becomes a symbolic act of overcoming that primal fear, taming nature, or mastering chaos. Think of Siegfried killing Fafnir in Norse mythology, or even Harry Potter battling dragons, or Voldemort with his serpent-like nose. These stories echo a deep mythic pattern. The hero must face the snake or dragon to achieve transformation, wisdom, or glory. And by defeating it, the hero brings about order and rebirth. It's an archetype that speaks to the success of past humans who survived, or maybe even confronted the threat of snakes. Whether it's the serpent in Eden, the coiled Ouroboros, the mighty feathered Quetzalcoatl, or the rod of Asclepius, these myths and symbols reflect something ancient and persistent in the human psyche. Importantly, they often show us that snakes were never just animals to fear, but also challenges to grapple with. They forced early humans to evolve sharper eyes and quicker minds, and later, to confront those same instincts through story, symbol, and ritual. But now let's flip the lens. We should also explore the role that we humans have played in shaping these creatures. It's important to note that snake bites are not always a result of active predation. They're more often the result of self-defense. Just as we are fearful of snakes, they will often defend themselves from the threat of Homo sapiens. It's tempting to think of humans as passive recipients of evolutionary pressures, especially when it comes to dangerous animals like snakes. But we weren't just shaped by snakes, we shaped them too. It's a two-way street. Most people think of snake venom as something used for hunting, to paralyze prey, subdue it, and make it easier to swallow. But in the case of spitting cobras, venom took on a very different evolutionary role. These snakes developed the ability to spray venom directly into the eyes of predators, causing immediate excruciating pain. What's remarkable is that this ability didn't just evolve once. It appeared independently in 3 different cobra lineages: African cobras, Asian cobras, and the wrinkles. Each time, the venom evolved to target mammalian sensory neurons, combining cytotoxins and enzymes in a way that maximizes pain rather than lethality. This wasn't about catching dinner, it was about self-defense. What were they defending themselves against? According to a 2021 study, one of the most likely culprits is us, or at least our ancestors. The timelines align. Spitting venom in African cobras emerged around 7 million years ago, approximately the same time that early hominins were evolving. Asian cobras developed spitting venom later, roughly 2.5 million years ago, coinciding with the arrival of Homo erectus in Asia. Early humans and other primates are among the only animals that actively seek out, recognize, and kill venomous snakes, often using tools and group tactics. This makes us a uniquely dangerous predator, and one that likely drove snakes to develop new long-range defenses. This research adds another layer to the story of human-snake coevolution. Just as we evolved sharper vision and faster fear responses to deal with snakes, snakes evolved more painful and targeted venom to deal with us. It's a true evolutionary arms race, one that played out not just in behavior and biology, but in chemistry. The snake's transformation from stealthy ambush predator to venom-spitting defender may be one of the clearest examples of how the rise of humans reshaped the natural world in ways we're only beginning to understand. And the snake is only one natural creature that appears in myths and religions. To explore more examples of the influence of the natural world on our belief systems, watch the video on animism on screen. Thanks for watching this one, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Stay curious.